Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. This week, Frayne Olson is our market analyst. We'll go through the recent Beef Products Incorporated lawsuit against ABC News. Rick Rasby will talk about bailing cornstalk residue. We'll look ahead to a biofuel mandate in New York, and Matt Spangler will discuss beef genetics. Frayne Olson from North Dakota State is our marketing analyst this week. In the latest World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates, the USDA says the 2012-2013 wheat balance sheet is unchanged. Grain markets did see a big break at the beginning of the week. We asked Frayne on Wednesday morning if most of that was still due to the latest WASDE report.
The combination of the WASDE report and I think some expectations by the financial community that prices may have reached their top. And so there was a lot of external money leaving the agricultural commodity markets and looking for a new home. And again, I think some of the announcements by the Federal Reserve and their quantitative easing 3, or QE3 as they say, may have also stimulated some move away from agricultural commodities and into other investments. So some of this is just the financial community looking for alternatives, and pretty massive sell-off in futures positions, and of course not as many buyers. And when you have that, you have a downturn in commodity prices.
Let's take a look at the WASDE report from the wheat side. We hadn't talked about that last week. What do you expect to see here? Do you think these numbers are accurate?
I think they're reasonably close for the U.S. production and consumption numbers. There were some questions raised when we look at the world numbers, in particular the areas that we've been talking about for a while, the Black Sea region. USDA took their expected production numbers down fairly hard. It looks as though the ending stocks in that region, when you combine Russia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, are actually going to be below the levels that we saw a couple years ago when they put the export bans on. So still rumors talked about in the market that there's going to be some movement by that region to somehow put restrictions on or limit the amount of exports going out of that region. The other area, or the new area of concern now we're watching very closely, is Australia, and in particular Western Australia having a lot of dry weather and drought concerns. So the numbers out of the Black Sea region, I think the market was expecting those to come down. The numbers out of Australia were not adjusted yet, but we do expect that to happen in the next report.
We'll cover exports in a bit here, but winter wheat planting across the country going strong. What do you expect to see here in terms of acres that are going to be planted?
Yeah, the current planting pace is pretty much on the 5-year average. We're about the regular pace. The expectation in the market right now is that we will see an increase in winter wheat seedings. The motivation is a little bit different depending upon where you are in the country. For the hardwood winter wheat area, with the very short feed supplies and pasture conditions being very limited, there's expectation we'll get some winter wheat seedings with the opportunity then to try and graze some of that winter wheat down and use it as a feed source. As you move into the soft red winter wheat area, you do the budgets and kind of the math on the economics of planting soft red winter wheat with a double crop into soybeans, and that math right now is working pretty good. So the expectation is we're going to see some increased soft red winter wheat plantings as well. So the export market will take on a new level of importance as we move forward.
Looking at that then, how supportive is the strength of the dollar to the export market?
Well, the value of the dollar is very critical for wheat exports. And again, as I mentioned before, the wheat market in the world stage is very liquid. We have a lot of buyers, we have a lot of sellers. And so when you look at what the end user is paying, the exchange rate, and i.e. the value of the dollar, has a big role to play in that. So the fact that the U.S. economy is starting to recover, that it looks as though the economic conditions in Europe are starting to stabilize a little bit. There's still some uncertainty there, but the fact that things are stabilizing a bit is helping reduce the value of the dollar, making exports reasonably comfortable right now.
Now the big buyers, however, some of them are in disarray. There's some political unrest in the Middle East and further south. How crucial is that to buyers across the seas?
Psychologically, it's actually very important, because when you look at North Africa, parts of the Middle East, and even into East Asia, meaning Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, that part of the world imports a lot of wheat. Whether it be from us or other regions, there's still a big demand for wheat in that area. The question that comes up is, given the political instability in that area, what's going to happen to export pace? And there's kind of two schools of thought. One school of thought is that, well, with the political unrest, there may be reduced imports or exports into that region because of the instability and the concerns about getting financing. The other alternative is, well, we're actually going to see an increase in imports or exports into that region, because there's a desire to reduce the anxiety of the populace, to try and reduce food prices, food inflation, and to try and add some political stability by increasing the flow of wheat into the region. So we're going to have to wait to see how that plays out.
Next week, we'll talk with Mike Briggs for his thoughts on the cattle markets. In other marketing news, the USDA announced Wednesday it would change the release time of several key reports starting in January. The reports for world agricultural supply and demand estimates, acreage, crop production, grain stocks, prospective plantings, and small grain summary will be released at 11 a.m. Central Time. The release time for livestock reports will stay the same at 2 p.m. USDA Chief Economist Joe Glauber said the shifts allow for the greatest liquidity in the markets, provides the greatest access to the reports during the working hours here in the U.S., and continues equal access to data among all parties. In late March, we reported on the controversy surrounding lean, finely textured beef. This was after ABC News ran a story questioning the product's safety. The fallout from that story and those that followed was felt across the world of agriculture. And last week, Beef Products Incorporated, a meat processor, filed a $1.2 billion lawsuit against ABC News, alleging it made nearly 200 false and misleading defamatory statements. This week, we discussed that lawsuit with John Bender, a professor in the College of Journalism and Mass Communications here at UNL. John teaches mass media law and has written papers on libel law and the U.S. Supreme Court. We started by asking him about BPI's grounds for the lawsuit.
They're basing this on 4 different legal bases. First of all, defamation. Secondly, product disparagement. Third element is tortious interference. And finally, violation of the South Dakota Agricultural Product Disparagement Law.
Let's talk about that last one, the Food Disparagement Act. What does that all entail?
Well, the South Dakota law says that if you disparage a perishable agricultural product, then you can be liable for the damages that result from that. The disparagement has to be knowingly false, but and it applies to, as I say, perishable agricultural products, anything that is likely to perish before, well, within a reasonable amount of time. The law doesn't really specify a period of time. It just says it has to be perishable.
Why is the lawsuit against ABC specifically? I mean, it's against ABC and the sources named within the interview itself or within the package, but why only ABC News? Why not the news organizations who picked it up after that?
Well, ABC apparently made a major effort to go into this. Between early March and early April of this year, ABC broadcast a number of pieces about this issue. They also had a lot of material about it on their website, on social media, Twitter, Facebook. BPI, the plaintiff, Beef Products Incorporated, accumulated a long list of what they consider to be defamatory and disparaging comments from those various things. Also, ABC had first broached this issue about 11 months earlier in a piece by Jamie Oliver on his Food Revolution show.
What's the case that BPI makes here? After this is the lawsuit, how do you go about it if you're BPI?
Well, BPI has to show for defamation that there was defamatory statements that were false and that were made by ABC with the knowledge that they were false, or with what's called reckless disregard, which means that ABC would have had a high degree of awareness of the probable falsity. And that's a very difficult burden for a plaintiff to prove. Nevertheless, BPI has made some allegations that, depending on how the facts develop, on what kind of evidence they have, they might be able to do it. They have a list of materials that they submitted to ABC after the first show that apparently they are claiming ABC did not respond to, did not take into account. They continue to repeat things that BPI insists are false, and if that were to be substantiated by the evidence, then that could be evidence that there was knowledge of falsity on ABC's part.
So they're saying it's basically one-sided and it was absolutely against the industry from the start.
Yes, yes.
What's the case that ABC News makes? What is its defense?
Well, I haven't seen any of their arguments yet, but I know ABC completely denies the lawsuit. They say that what they were reporting was accurate, that it was based on solid sources, and so they, at this point anyway, they're talking about defending this all the way.
What are the chances that it actually goes to court before either being settled or before being thrown out? Normally, like cases like this, is that what happens? Normally settlement, or do they usually get to court?
It's not unusual in a libel suit to see what will probably happen is or may well happen is that ABC will ask for summary judgment. They'll say that there's not enough information here, or that BPI is not able to substantiate its allegations that the publications were made with knowledge of falsity or reckless disregard of falsity. And if ABC can win on that, then the suit would be dismissed. Quite often these things are settled out of court, but sometimes they go to trial, and sometimes in these instances really nobody's a winner, because while the plaintiff might not get any money or all the money they want, the defendant sometimes winds up with its own reputation damaged. I know that happened to CBS many years ago when it was sued by William Westmoreland for what he considered to be a defamatory documentary.
John notes one of the aspects of BPI's lawsuit against ABC News is that its sources weren't credible. They allege one source had been fired by BPI and pursued a personal vendetta against the company since 2001. John says that aspect could help BPI in proving actual malice. The National Biodiesel Board is commending the Environmental Protection Agency and the administration of President Barack Obama for their support of a strong domestic energy policy. This comes after the EPA announced last Friday it would increase the 2013 volume requirement for biomass-based diesel under the renewable fuel standard to 1.28 billion gallons. The biodiesel industry produced nearly 1.1 billion gallons last year. A study conducted by Cardno Entrix, an international economics consulting firm, says the industry supported more than 39,000 jobs last year and accounted for $3.8 billion in gross domestic product. The National Biodiesel Board says the 2013 volume increase will support 10,000 new jobs. In related news, you may remember we told you in December about the promotion of biodiesel and bioheat in New York City. Bioheat is biodiesel blended with heating oil used to warm homes and buildings. We told you then that the market for bioheat was enormous, and Greg Greving from the Nebraska Soybean Board says it's about to get bigger.
In New York on October 1st, there's going to be a 2% mandate on biofuels going into the home heating market, and it's going to be a 20 million market share going into that of B100. and that's going to take a lot of the soybean oil that's produced from the soybeans and soybean meal here in the state of Nebraska and go back there, so that will add value to the oil and to the meal and eventually back to the producers here in the state of Nebraska. The Nebraska Soybean Board has been working with a lot of people back in New York to get this implemented and give them the technical side of it and everything, and so it's worked out well for both parties.
In case you missed our reporting in December, you can see our work from New York City on the Market Journal website. The USDA announced Wednesday it would provide an additional $11.8 million to help crop and livestock producers in 22 states apply conservation practices in hopes of reducing the impacts of drought and improve soil health and productivity. This brings the USDA's total assistance to nearly $28 million since early summer. In our continuing drought coverage, this week Rick Rasby discusses using corn stalk bales in your management plan.
Hi, I'm Rick Rasby. I'm beef specialist here at the University of Nebraska. I'd like to maybe visit with you a little bit about using corn stalk bales this winter as a feed resource for the beef cows. Because of the drought this summer, alfalfa prices are high as well as the hay prices. The other thing is that due to the drought, there's a limited amount of those forages as well. And in some cases, there'll be opportunity to use corn stalk bales as part of that diet this winter. Corn stalk bales can be fairly nutritious. As you increase the amount of leaf and husk in that bale and reduce the amount of stalk in that bale, you'll increase the nutrient value of that feed resource. In fact, when you take a look at the data, those bales that have quite a bit of leaf and husk will test somewhere between 50 to 55% TDN, and they'll be 5%, maybe 6% in regards to crude protein. As you increase the amount of stock in that bale, the nutrient quality would go down. And so having a good handle on nutrient quality will be important for feeding the beef cow. The other thing is, and so as you think about testing those feeds, you would not take a grab sample, you take a probe sample. That way you get a representative sample from that bale, as compared to a grab sample, you would not get a representative sample from the bales or bales that you're going to sample for testing. When you send it into the lab to test, I would test for moisture, crude protein, and energy in the form of TDN. And this year, mainly due to the fact that we've grown this corn residue under drought conditions, I would also test it for nitrates. This can be a good feed for beef cattle this winter, especially for cows that calve in March and April. You'd want to make sure that you test it for quality as well as nitrates before you feed it.
Also on the Market Journal website now, you can see UNL Animal Science Professor Jim McDonald discuss how nitrates affect cattle, and Rick Rasby outlining a checklist for crop residue grazing this fall and winter. Drought brings some important decisions about taxes. In the September Nebraska Farmer, the executive director of Nebraska Farm Business Inc. says one of the most critical matters relates to the sale of livestock. Tina Barrett tells Nebraska Farmer readers there are two options for livestock producers who have to sell livestock: a 1-year deferral and a 4-year deferral. Barrett cautions that you must be able to prove the drought did in fact cause the sale of the livestock. You can read more about these tax issues in the September Nebraska Farmer. The University of Nebraska-Lincoln's theme at Husker Harvest Days last week was strengthening the state of beef. On average, there are 2.3 million head of cattle on feed in Nebraska, and more than 5 million cattle are fed and marketed in the state every year. Its commercial red meat production of 7.1 billion pounds led the country again in 2011. In Grand Island, we talked with Matt Spangler about matching beef genetics to a specific environment.
So the concept of allowing genetics to fit your environment is important, particularly as we think about reproduction. Cattle that don't fit their environment, particularly high-performance cattle and low feed input environments, often have trouble rebreeding. So it really boils down to allowing cattle to express their genetic potential, but being in sync with the environment such that they can maintain and have longevity within that herd.
So what do you all look at? Let's take Nebraska, for example. What do you look at Nebraska that would fit a gene?
So I think in low input environments, and of course this year's drought brings to mind the challenges that can come with a low feed availability kind of environment. We think about moderating mature cow size. Obviously larger cows tend to eat more, but another hidden thing might be milk production. We know that heavier milking cows tend to require more nutrients, not only when they're lactating, but also when they're dry because of larger visceral organ sizes. So as we're selecting our next herd bull, we might think about selecting bulls that have lower, more conservative, mature weight EPDs, and certainly selecting bulls that have lower milk EPDs as well, particularly if we're keeping replacement heifers. If we're purchasing replacement heifers, then we need to purchase them having some knowledge of their genetic background such that we're optimizing mature size and milk to go with our feed availability and thus our environment. And again, there's plenty of EPDs to do that, mature size, milk EPDs, and several breeds have economic indices that could be used for producers that are retaining their own replacement heifers, producers that are concerned about feed input costs as well.
Is it even something then that once you narrow down what you want, it still takes time to specifically get in the, I guess, in the groove, so to speak?
It does take time to make genetic change, but those traits that we talked about, like mature weight, is highly heritable. So of all the traits we think about, we can make rapid progress in that trait. Milk production is moderately heritable, so we can make some genetic progress in that as well relatively rapidly. The neat thing is, with genomic technology now, we're increasing the accuracy of those kinds of EPDs, allowing us to choose with more confidence bulls that are in the range that we'd prefer.
Contrast it for me. What would be not necessarily opposite of Nebraska, but something that wouldn't be a fit for Nebraska, that would be a fit somewhere else?
So you could look at a place, and this year it's hard to find, but has extremely great resources, extremely high feed availability, that maybe from a biological standpoint could maintain animals that are larger in mature weight, even heavier in milk production. I stress from a biological standpoint, economics can be a bit different, but traditionally we think of places perhaps in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, where the grass resource is a bit different than we'd find in the sandhills of Nebraska. So it really is important to think about your location, your production environment when you're selecting herd bulls.
With what you look at in a year like this where it's forcing producers to sell off their herds at a greater amount than they want, how much does that throw a wrench into what you're trying to do overall for your herd?
It does change things some in the sense that you may have to cull females, maybe you don't retain as many replacements as you have in the past, but a breeding goal is a long-term goal. And you have to realize that things like this certainly are hopefully short-lived. So you have to stay the course, although it does bring to mind maybe your mature weight's too much, maybe your milk production's too heavy, and you see those things manifested in a year like this, so it allows you to correct for it. But again, breeding objectives are long-term goals, so it's important to stay the course, keep your eye on the ball, and continue to make improvements year after year.
Now here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher to forecast the coming week.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Before we get to the main forecast, let's take a retrospective look at this past week. Last week we were talking about the potential for a couple fronts to come through that might generate some precipitation, particularly the midweek system. We only seen some very light scattered precipitation across extreme eastern Nebraska, but for most locations pretty much a high and dry setup. And of course the front that came through yesterday was basically a dry front. So we did see the colder air move in, and we did see some hard freezing conditions across portions of the northern plains and the upper Midwest. Here in Nebraska, more or less scattered frost conditions. Now we've seen some cooler conditions move in, and we expect that those will start to moderate as the weekend progresses, and then we'll pay attention to an upper air low that will be crossing the Rockies that potentially may generate some precipitation as we move into the early into middle part of next week. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what it is forecasting in regards to our precipitation and temperatures. And as we go to the upper air models for today, we are going to see that there is a pretty persistent trough across the upper Great Lakes. This is where most of the precipitation activity is going to remain. Very cool, damp conditions across the Great Lakes. For here in Nebraska with the northwest flow, we're going to stay fairly cool across eastern Nebraska, northeast Nebraska, and probably north central Nebraska. It's going to be very difficult for them to struggle out of the upper 50s, maybe making it into the low 60s. As you get into western Nebraska, even though we're forecasting highs somewhere into the low to mid 80s, we have to recognize that this trough may actually push a little bit farther westward in terms of cold air, and so we may actually have to drop some temperatures 5 degrees, depending on how quickly this trough starts to break down as it moves eastward during the latter half of the day. But by the time we get to Sunday, this trough will start to move into the northeastern United States, and here comes the upper air low that is going to slowly drift toward the plains. So for tomorrow, we are expecting pretty much sunny skies, a little bit warmer conditions in the northeast Nebraska. We'll be pushing into the upper 60s. And in western Nebraska, where we're closer to the eastern edge of the ridge, we'll be looking at highs in the low 80s to possibly mid 80s. Now, as we get into Monday, this storm system starts to make its way into western Colorado, and there might be a little bit of moisture available for some very isolated showers to develop across the western third of the state, particularly late in the day. But we'll be looking for a little bit more warmth, rebounding into northeastern Nebraska with highs in the mid 70s. As you get into western Nebraska, we'll probably be pushing the mid to upper 80s, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see an isolated 90-degree mark come out of the panhandle. Now on Tuesday, the system starts to open up, so there is some moisture available. The best precipitation at this point in time would be for western Nebraska. We'd be looking at highs in the mid 70s across northern Nebraska to possibly the mid 80s across southeastern Nebraska. On Wednesday, this is where the real action by the models is indicating that we see some precipitation. Doesn't look like a significant amount, but it is precipitation. We're looking at highs in the low 70s across northeast Nebraska to the upper 70s across western Nebraska. On Thursday, the system starts to pass to our east. We'll be looking at highs in the lows to mid 70s in the northeast to the low 80s across the west. And on Friday, much warmer conditions. We'll be looking at mid to upper 70s across the northeast to the mid 80s across western Nebraska. 8 to 14-day forecasting indicates the cool conditions move to our east. And unfortunately, precipitation once again looks drier than normal.
Thanks, Al. On next week's show, we'll announce the winner of the Market Journal photo contest. While voting is closed, you can still see all the entries on our Market Journal Facebook page. Those pictures with the top 5 amount of likes are being judged by our panel, with one winner to be selected. Our market analyst next week will be Mike Briggs, and Brad Lubin will discuss the Farm Bill. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.